Yeah, so this has been, as you might imagine, one of the most exciting days of my life. There are a lot of things that could have gone wrong, and some of them did. You worry about your internet connection. So at the 7:30 get together during Taryn's presentation, I was absent for about 7 minutes or so, and that's why we have part one and part two. And it looked like maybe something went wrong with the recording of part two, but that's just because Zoom decided to record in the cloud. So anyway, so I recorded part one on my computer, and then the internet gods bumped me out and I came back in and it started recording again. But then when the whole thing ended, there was no recording happening for part two on my computer. That's because it was in the cloud. So it all turned out fine. And really, I think let me start with the most general questions for you guys, and then we can get down to more specifics. But what Arjun Karki said is that he was very pleased with Taryn and Nadiya's presentations, and he can now easily imagine that we'll be able to trial this version of the course in the summer, and it will become a part of their curriculum generally. But he suggested that maybe they would come up with additional subjects that they would like in the course. And so I think, isn't this an opportunity for you guys to suggest what you think might be additional subjects? Now, what would be the impact of adding new stuff? We'd have to temporarily get rid of the old stuff, but we always do this. I mean, every single term, there are things that we leave out because we're putting in other things. For a fairly lengthy period, we did nanotechnology and had somewhere between 1 and 3 nanotech lectures. We don't have them at the moment. We used to have only 1 quantum biology lecture, and now we have 4. Yeah, there's all sorts of dynamic things. And there's no rule that we have to have this or we have to have that. It's kind of up to you, the consumers of the course, right? And we could infinitely expand ethics. We can contract it. There could be no formal ethics lectures, but just ethicists sitting in on some of the sessions, or we could do a lot more ethics. But Dr. Karki also expanded our understanding of what the culture of Nepal has also sort of given to the citizens, which is this expectation that the individual is unimportant and there's somebody who makes all decisions, right? And they just do what that person says. And there are many countries where this has been the predominant culture. Nepal's not unique. But that's part of what they're trying to change, to get the individuals, the young people, to realize they have a voice, and that voice needs to be heard, and they don't need to be just following what some leader or what their parents say or something. They can have independent opinions, activities, and so on. So it's not just sort of learning critical thinking, it is also learning that you have the right to be your own person, right? To kind of develop as your own person, and that the world will benefit from that. It's not just a thing you can do, but it's good for humanity to hear from you. You know, you may have unique ideas that can improve things for a lot of people. And the more the heterogeneity is of the people that we hear from, the better off everyone is. Yeah, so why don't, I think maybe the first thing we ought to do is, since Nadiya is here, why doesn't she sort of give her impressions, and you know, what is the kind of summary that we're left with from her point of view? And then why don't you guys, so I mean, that would be really interesting to me either way. Like if you say, no, I don't want any changes, the schedule of the lectures is perfect, and I don't change the thing. Well, that would be interesting. But also it's possible that for you, taking this course is kind of a compromise, because yeah, it's got some good features, but you really wish it had this or that, right? Yeah, so that would be really valuable for all of us to hear. So Nadiya, tell me your impression of what went on at 7:30 and what lessons.
I think the people on webcam are the MVPs, because if I see them speaking, that means he's talking to us.
Hi, Anita. I think you need to
and they're
mute
not
yourself.
speaking, so I don't think we have to do any intros.
Yeah, Anita, your mic is on.
Okay, we're good.
I have muted her.
That's happened to the best of us all the time. Yeah, but Taryn gave a really nice talk about how we can encourage critical thinking and how there's different stages to critical thinking that we can go through. So I don't know if anybody watched the YouTube video, but I would highly recommend watching Taryn's part of it, because there's some really important messages there that I know, especially that Hannah and Ayla might also want to think about for education, how to encourage critical thinking in education. And for my part, I just kind of rambled about black holes a bit.
No, I thought that your presentation was the expectations were so low. You used the word chaos at the beginning, and I thought, oh boy, is that the theme, chaos? But no, I thought it was kind of riveting. It was very interesting to those of us who don't know much about astrophysics. Yeah, and
yeah, something Arjun mentioned that I found really interesting is like how to encourage that sense of awe, you know, how we're just
right.
so small in the universe. And that's something that we can talk about today if you guys like. I'm also working on quickly setting up a Jamboard with some questions that Taryn had for the class that she's not able to ask us in person. So we can also work on that. Or I can just tell you more about black holes. I don't know.
Yeah, so the other thing I wanted to tell you is that we have a logo for the course for Nepal. Let me bring it up here. Yeah, and so this is the logo. Of course, the regular course doesn't have a logo, but that's okay. So anyway, but the Nepal. So this is sort of taking the idea of black holes and being inspired by the night sky and putting it into a logo. And yeah, it has the advantage for a resource limited country. You don't need colors for this logo, right? So that's good. And yeah, so let me go back to this was the colorful black hole that I found for my background in the session. So yeah, I would say that from an educational point of view, the two presentations were more or less equal. I didn't feel like that yours was weak or lacking or anything. And yeah, and I think you were feeling a little bit under the weather. And if this is how you present when you're under the weather, I can imagine how spectacular it would have been if you were feeling normal. So yeah, no, I thought the whole thing was really good. And Arjun, I mean, he's a good example of leadership skills. Eh? He really makes you want to do your best, and yet he's not just sort of running things. He's adding nuances and so on that really enhance the whole conversation. So I thought it was great all the way around. Yeah, so how about some ideas from some of the other students about how we should proceed? Of course, we can do things. I mean, we're not absolutely dependent upon that, but I think it would be good to just go back to gallery view here. Yeah, see what thoughts are. So what about adding to the content of the course? I mean, let's say that we already will add some astrophysics and so on. Okay, so there's a Jamboard. Yeah, good. So any urgent thoughts about things you would like to see added? I kind of feel that my own motivation will get us back to nanotech at some point. We will be doing nanotech. We don't really have somebody to teach it now, but we eventually will again. And you know, we sort of have special things every term that make that term different from all the others. The focus on Nepal and the Nepal course is that thing, I guess, for this term. But maybe it will also be virtual reality, augmented reality. It's possible that that session will go better. I'm thinking, since the sessions are entirely virtual, since to the end of February, that we may move the virtual reality session to March. Like we could move Ashita's presentation to February and then move that to March, so we could do it face to face. May end up being the only face-to-face encounter, but it sort of doesn't work otherwise, right? I mean, it's hard to do that headset stuff. Okay, tech and medicine in space and on the International Space Station. Yeah, so that would be Ashana Pandya. Yeah, and that's sort of interesting in terms of my own sort of command of the world, right? You know, how much is Kim Solez in charge and so on. Like you'll see that over the years, there's been tremendous variation in how much Shauna teaches. But one of the good things about the pandemic is it's you can imagine she would be traveling the world in ordinary times, and she was, and spending a lot of time doing very exotic things, but that's a bit reduced during the pandemic. So we could definitely get her to do more teaching, and that this could be one session. Yeah. So yeah, that's certainly practical. So any other thoughts about what you would like to see added, or things we should consider to add? You know, your ideas aren't being graded here. There is no downside of actually suggesting something. So, okay. Perhaps something to do with data in healthcare. Yep. So, you know, you may think that we have so many artificial intelligence people presenting to us that there are no more options, but actually there are lots of other options. So we could either have one of the existing people talk about data in healthcare. Osmar Cyan already does this in his lectures to some extent, but we could drill down more into, you know, actual examples and so on. But there's several other people who over the years have taught in the course who could add that. Yeah, so any other thoughts?
If not, I know we do have a couple of prompting questions from Taryn that we can discuss.
Yeah.
Okay, so a question that Taryn did ask of you guys is about your general experiences in and out of the classroom that have made you a better critical thinker, not a bitter critical thinker.
Or maybe both.
Yeah. So feel free to type stuff in the Jamboard, or, you know, just raise your hand or unmute yourself and discuss your experiences, maybe in the classroom or at university. What's encouraged you to improve your critical thinking skills, or if you have any general thoughts about, you know, why critical thinking skills are important to your field and to the future. Because I know the sentiment for many educators is that, you know, the future is changing so rapidly. We don't even know what jobs we're really preparing students for. So at the very least, we can prepare them to be adaptable and think critically about the decisions they make. So that's sort of like the educator perspective, but I'd love, and I'm sure Taryn would love to hear your perspectives.
Yeah, I certainly think it's important in medicine and in health in general. And yeah, it makes you more on top of things. I mean, one thing is, you know, agency and feeling like you're, yeah, quicker paced learning environments, being able to adapt to those circumstances in many aspects of life. Yeah. No,
I'd love to hear for the person who wrote that, to expand on what do you mean about circumstances. If you want to mute yourself. I don't want to put anybody on the hot spot, but it's nice having those more face-to-face discussions, even if we are virtual.
Yeah.
Ooh, hands-on learning. If anybody wants to speak on that, I'd love to hear.
So, you know, it's sort of interesting to think back, if you wish, to January 1973, and what was I thinking, right? Like most people, when they start a career in medicine, they are convinced that the challenges are overwhelming and they can't add anything to their agenda, right? So I wonder why it was that I decided to take those 5 Oberlin College winter term students that January, but it has turned out very well. You would say that 1 month of my first year of pathology study was altered by having the students there, but then they came back in the summer and I kept on doing that for the next 49 years. But I think what it is that it somehow puts your life in balance if you're both teaching and being taught somehow. You would realize that for most of my professional career, that's been the situation. Because I still feel that I'm learning. And when people describe the curiosity of childhood, I secretly feel that I still have it, and it'll be interesting to see, right? Yeah. Formulate differential diagnosis, help. Yeah. I think a lot of things in medicine, like coming up with diagnoses, interviewing patients, taking a patient history, presenting patients at rounds, those are just kind of extensions of critical thinking. It's like a more specific example of critical thinking. But the rote memorization as a single approach doesn't work very well there. Can easily end up going down the wrong road, and then you look like the dumbest person in the room, right? Because you picked some obvious trajectory and went deep into it, and you're just totally wrong. Yeah. So, but this idea of having agency, having something to say, yeah, and it's also interesting to think about burnout and like people in medicine and law and other high-profile professions who are dissatisfied and kind of frustrated and so on, and feel their options are limited. That is not something that is done to you. That's like an interactive thing where you've interacted with the world for a long time, and then you end up in this situation where you feel you've painted yourself into a corner, but that didn't have to happen. So I think something about the critical thinking skills can also prevent you from painting yourself into a corner and taking a naturally happy profession, being the only sad person within it, or something like that. Yeah. So
I wonder how this aspect of critical thinking fits into patient-doctor relationships. I mean, I'm not in medicine, so I don't know as much about it as perhaps some of the other folks in here, but it'd be interesting to think about, because, as like Arjun was talking about how, in Nepal and in many other countries, there's this idea that the teacher must not be questioned, right? The teacher's the authority. So students don't critically think, they just accept everything the teacher says because that's a culture, that's how they're taught growing up. And I'm sure the same relationship sort of translates to the doctor-patient relationship, where it's like, right, okay, the doctor knows best. We don't question, we don't critically think. So I'd be interested in hearing people's perspectives and your perspective, Dr. Solez, about how critical thinking how we can encourage critical thinking in patients, but also, I could see there being some
Yeah.
opposing arguments to that as well.
Yeah, in the first lecture, when I talk about not being afraid of complexity, that your significant other is complex, you wouldn't have it any other way, and so on, right? But like, just think of like being in a clinic, seeing multiple patients, and so each encounter, the challenges there are quite interesting, and this can all be quite positive and fun and satisfying, depending upon what level you're operating at. In virtually every kind of medicine, there are these intrinsically rewarding moments that are so enjoyable. It's kind of a high level enjoyment. It isn't like enjoyment you get from candy or something like that. It's like, really at the highest intellectual level, that you realize you've saved someone, you've helped someone, and so on. But how does that come about? Well, as you're talking to the patient, you're also thinking about the extended team, the people you could refer them to, who could also help the nurse, the dietitian, the social worker, all these people, and yet keeping them feeling that you're truly engaged and interested in them. So you're talking to them and looking at the medical record and adding to the medical record, right? All those things at once. And there are things to help you. I mean, in the past, I would say before whatever it was, November 2019, we had a really bad electronic medical record system here and in many of the local hospitals. And now we have something that's really quite good, and it has all sorts of things to help you, to assist you. And how do I know it's good? Well, I was a super user. I was supposed to help the people around me learn Epic. And it was the easiest job I ever had. People praised me for being a super user, but nobody asked me any tough questions, because the program is good enough and has been rolled out in so many big medical centers that there are not that many bugs in it, So I mean, that was really, really cool. I thought, oh, geez, I've got to devote most of my time over these weeks to all these questions of people's frustration that they can't use this new system. And that just didn't happen. And it's not just me. I mean, you might say, well, yeah, they're afraid of you. No, there were only two of us in that super user role. And the other person had the same experience, that, she was ready for hundreds of questions and ended up with like 3 or 4 or 5 in that entire period. Yeah, so it was really cool. And now in the province, not every center has Epic and so on. Yeah, but even that, like if you think of what we're doing now, interacting with each other, the quality of our interaction now is considerably better than the old healthcare system, where we were leaving voicemails. I mean, who uses voicemail? That was like our main way of contacting people. And no one ever knew in the other service, like if you're doing one kind of medicine interacting with another kind, you never knew who was really in charge of that patient on the other service. So we were sending blanket emails to 5 or 6 people because you had no idea who. Yeah, it was just crazy. And now all that's fixed. You've got secure chat, and the secure chat even works from home. It works on multiple different devices, and it's kind of non-intrusive in the sense that it doesn't mean you have to be always watching your phone and so on. But when you do look at your phone again, and like you've been away from your phone and the other people in the conversation were there, it's just fine. They've done some of the heavy lifting because you weren't there, and yeah, so it's all sort of it's got a natural justice to it that I just never ever anticipated that communication could be as good as it is now. So yeah, and it gives opportunity to try to aspire to even better things, you know, when you're communicating really well. So
I noticed Jessica has written in the chat about patient-centered care. I would really appreciate it if you could unmute yourself, Jessica, and tell me more about that. I have a couple of questions.
Hey, yeah.
Oh,
So yeah, just basically what I was trying to say is like patients still don't have like a ton of, I mean, there's more autonomy than before and more like opportunities for critical thinking from patients. But yeah, they've kind of been teaching us like if there are multiple options for a treatment or a plan moving forward for a patient, like you can present them to all of the options to the patient, and like you can give your recommendations, but ultimately it is up to them and you can support them in that decision. So, I mean, you're still the one presenting all of the options, so you kind of remove some of that, but it has increased the amount of critical thinking that patients do, even though it's still minimal. And I meant to say centered, not entered, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I heard that wrong. Centered makes way more sense. But yeah, that's really interesting to me because it's like you're encouraging this practice that encourages critical thinking in patients, right, about their own care. But like this morning when Taryn was presenting about critical thinking, she talked about how we're all at different stages in critical thinking, just depending on, you know, we vary from day to day, but we also vary in our own critical thinking development. So I wonder if there are ever any concerns that you might have if a patient has really poor critical thinking, right? Because there seems to be another aspect where it's like, okay, you're not only a doctor, right? You also need to help that patient along with their critical thinking too. So there's that aspect of it where it's guided. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Jessica?
So kind of what you're saying is like the like do no harm kind of thing, like where you want the best for the patient, but they might not have the best critical thinking skills to do the best for themselves. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like an internal struggle we all have. But I think the best way to go about it is like how I think of it is like I give them all of the options and like I tell them like what I think would be best, but it's ultimately like they're autonomous human beings, and like as long as you present them with all of the information in a way that's understandable, which is often a huge challenge, is breaking that down into a way that's understandable to somebody who has no background in something you've spent like over 8 years probably working on. It's hard, but yeah, I feel like it's difficult. I don't even know where I'm going with this. It's difficult, like, but you have to, basically it's the patient autonomy really, and all you can do is just give them all of the possible information and maybe make suggestions. And yeah, not all patients are capable of critical thinking to the level that they would end up doing what's best for them, but it's, I don't know, it's kind of like it's a complex line. You don't really know how to do that.
To some extent, you need to factor in the patient's culture and beliefs. Let me tell you what was for me a really moving story that came from the very first year of the course. So in fall of 2011, more than 10 years ago, Bibiana Kujek is a cardiologist. And she's worked here forever, like I have, but we never met here for some reason. We didn't know each other till we both went to Nepal and we met there. And she tells the following story, which does not have just one way to interpret it. So she and some of her cardiologist friends are trekking around Mount Everest, in that area of the very high peaks in Nepal, and it's a very memorable thing to do, and so on. And they had these Sherpa guides. And one night, one of the Sherpa guides felt unwell, and he told his other Sherpa guides that I think this is my time. Come with me. This is where I'd like to pass into the next world. So, they go to this clearing, and he lies there. And in the morning, by the time the cardiologists are up, this Sherpa guide is dead. And so the cardiologists all think something terrible has happened, because they had all this life-saving equipment with them, right? They could have rushed in and done all, assuming he died of a cardiac death, but I don't even know that for sure. But the other way to look at it is to think of karma, right? And like how the guy would have felt after telling all his friends that I think this is my time, and I'm about to pass into the next life, and this is where I'd like to do it. And the other, what if the cardiologist has rushed in, pushed everybody aside, started medicating and intubating and so on, it could have messed up his karma big time. I don't know. But it's just another way to look at things. And like patients who believe that their illness is the will of God, and that they're not going to fight it because it is God's will, That doesn't happen all that often, but it happens at the most surprising times that something like this comes up, and that I think the bottom line is you always need to realize, just as Taryn said at the beginning of her presentation today, that you don't have all the answers. You don't even necessarily know all the questions. You don't quite know what this situation you're now encountering, what its various components are, and what it's really all about, where the challenges are, where the easy parts of it are. The lecture that Taryn often gives has to do with Eastern medicine versus Western, where a person can believe, and it's probably true, that they're sick because they're coming from a sort of very unfortunate background of poverty and discrimination and lack of agency in their own life. They can't really do the things that they want to be doing. And so they believe they've become sick because of these things. And then when they come to the West and they go to the doctor, they get some sort of single organ answer, right? That your kidney is failing or something, which may be true, but they know the overall circumstance that I'm sick because I haven't been eating good food for a long time. I'm dehydrated most of the time because I live so far from the source of water, and everybody is mean to me, and so I feel sort of, I'm not on top of and making decisions in my own life. And from an Eastern point of view, this is the reason that I'm sick and it's not easily fixable. And both are really true, right? The organ dysfunctions, the things you can treat as a sort of individual working in a subspecialized medical field, those things are there. But the other things, the social responsibility of medicine, the physician is a natural attorney of the poor, all that kind of stuff is also true, right? That to truly fix things for this patient, you'd have to sort of go a bit beyond just pure medicine to fixing the background of their life. Yeah. So now, when I sign out a kidney biopsy, the report comes back on Epic indicating whether the patient will have access to it, has already seen it, or will not have access to it. And it depends upon what's considered to be in the patient's best interests and that sort of thing. But that's something brand new this year, that this patient access for reports, and a lot of things are changing at once. COVID is changing a bunch of things and reducing all sorts of other services because it's much like HIV in Kenya was back in the 90s. HIV was taking such a tremendous toll that they converted entire hospitals into just sort of places taking care of AIDS. And yeah, I'm not saying it's exactly like that, but it is a little bit like that. And for a while, kidney medicine in Africa was sort of subdued because the whole healthcare establishment, it is so thin, or whatever you want to say, under-resourced, that you couldn't fight HIV and kidney disease at the same time. You had to convert some of your renal physicians to people doing front lines for HIV, and the same is true now, that a lot of specialized medicine, lots of surgeries are being canceled and so on. And it's not just canceling those things, it's actually diverting the people to COVID-related care. So there are enough people for that. So yeah, it's quite a transformation.
Now, I know there was another question Taryn had, which ties into the previous question, and it asks you to consider how students can or should be motivated to learn more about critical thinking. So how to encourage that sort of intrinsic motivation, right? So what are the levels of critical thinking? The second level is where a person starts to critically think about things, but only because there's that extrinsic motivation, right? There's that guided coaching, they're going to be like marked on it essentially. So how can we encourage that intrinsic motivation to learn more about critical thinking and to be, thinking about your own learning and improving yourself? And this ties into the original slide, which is, what other aspects of the future can be used to teach and motivate critical thinking.
Yeah.
So have at it at the Jamboard, or unmute yourself. We'd love to hear your voices.
So I kind of feel, I mean, one of the most popular things that I talk about with medical students is keeping the things that made you interesting enough to get into medical school in the first place, right? Not like giving up playing the piano and the other, your high level accomplishments that made you really interesting applicant, not sort of giving up on all that stuff because you need to focus solely on medicine. I've never done that, and I don't think most medical students don't need to do that either. And likely critical thinking already enters into those other high level skills that you have. So yeah, encourage discussions that are controversial. Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Dr. Solez, do we have any controversial hot takes to discuss right now?
I don't know if I do. Well, yeah. I mean, like forged vaccine passports, right? I mean, that's probably on everybody's mind. But how many settings that you end up in, you know that the people have to have a vaccine passport to be there, but how many of those are forged passports? So the person is unvaccinated and a liar, right? So sort of two dangerous things. It's dangerous to sit beside somebody who's unvaccinated. It's probably also dangerous in other ways to sit beside somebody who's a liar. So yeah, you got both going on. And depending upon the venue, I think there's a lot of that. The pace of things is moving so fast that, like, they're overspending on unemployment. So, like they were trying to, I forget where I saw they're trying to claw back billions of inappropriate unemployment payments that they paid up. But it's the same sort of thing here that you wouldn't expect, since they rushed in the vaccine passports, that their ability to tell the real ones from the fake ones would be ideal, and the people making that decision are not very strongly motivated to say, hey, that looks like a fake vaccine passport, because you never know what the consequence of saying that is, right? So anyway, yeah.
Is there any way technology and AI can be used to solve that problem?
Sure. See, one of the things is you could set up, and this will be more and more feasible as AI becomes more trusted, more able to do stuff. You can put it in a situation where it can make those controversial calls, like in a very robotic voice. This vaccine passport does not look valid. This QR code, it does not compute, or something like that. And if a person said that, maybe a fist fight would break out, but because it's an AI, and maybe it's ruggedized. We haven't talked about that in a few years, but there used to be this big push for ruggedized computers, right? Computers that you can drop from aircraft and they still work when they hit the ground, and computers you can throw downstairs. Well, that would be the kind of computer that would have that job of saying your QR code is not valid, right? So it's virtually, it has a very thick skin, that computer. So it's still
when you said ruggedized, I was just imagining the Terminator. Yeah, nobody's gonna beat up that AI robot because they're jacked.
Yeah.
But like, you brought up an interesting point, which is, I feel like if we had robots or AI checking people's vaccine passports, yeah, people aren't going to get in a fight with a robot as much as they are with humans. And that's such a weird thing to think about, that like the fact that it's inhuman means that it's treated more humanely in a way than actually.
But I mean, that's been true for a long time with psychotherapy. Just having people tell you their problems a lot of people that need psychological counseling, maybe not truly psychiatric patients, but people who just need to talk out their problems, would much rather tell their intimate problems to a machine that's going to be non-judgmental and can't be sort of thinking unkind thoughts about them and so on. Yeah, they'd much rather do that than with a real person. Yeah, so it's already that.
Misva, can I ask you to clarify your green sticky note there about wrong answers and such?
Yeah, so I think it was more about kind of like the second part of the question, just saying like what other aspects can we use of like the future to teach and motivate critical thinking. I think that like your talk on black holes was like a really good example of like allowing critical thinking, just because there isn't really a wrong answer, because it's not something tangible that we can show on our hands that like, no, this is the way it is and this is like the only way that we can see them and any other answer is wrong. So teaching on like more topics that I think that you don't really have like a right or wrong answer to, like if we did, I don't know, like ocean exploration or like random stuff that like we don't have specifics on, would also maybe help like bring ideas and like have students want to like share their thoughts because they have an option of like not being wrong. But yeah, that's all.
Thanks, Misva. Sorry to pick on you, it's just because I know
okay.
you. But is there, like, how did you try and encourage critical thinking in like student teaching?
I think the best way to do it would be just to like ask like questions that you give like both sides of the answer to, almost like to say like, I don't know, like we could have, I don't know, technology that like detects this, but then do you guys think that technology would work like in this like part of the ocean or in this part of the world, or what do you think would be like problems we could see? And then like have kind of a list on the board so that they know that like more than one answer is encouraged, rather than it being like, no, this is the only answer I'm looking for. So like writing stuff out on the board, I think is like a really good way for teachers to encourage it, because then it looks like you're looking for multiple ideas rather than one. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Misva. Yeah, I know that's definitely a problem that with education is like by the time we reach university, we're already sort of taught to just guess what the teacher wants and just deliver, So there's that expectation that there's only one right answer, right? Multiple choice. And then we're thrown into classes like this where nothing is certain. We have to figure out and critically think and argue with other opinions, other answers, and it's in my opinion way more exciting than just having one right answer.
That's true. And I think it also gives like students confidence too, to like be able to speak up, especially for like the quieter kids too, who like normally wouldn't say anything. And I think if you like also are the one as like the teacher to like give bizarre ideas and stuff that they think would be absolutely nuts, then it kind of encourages kids to like be like, okay, well, my answer's not that weird then compared to this. So they're like encouraged to say something. But yeah, I think that's a good point.
I have something to add. I find for myself, like when I just go into these like crazy like rabbit holes of like research and critical thinking and like staying up at night just thinking about these like unimaginable things. I do that a lot. It's usually based on something that I have quite a bit of knowledge in already. So I feel like having a basis of like a solid foundation of an idea and then just like moving it one level up and really being able to think through it that way is like a huge help. Like I remember, I don't know if you guys remember this story about like the twins that returned home from space, or one returned home from space or something, and one had longer telomeres than the other. Yeah. Like that was so cool. But the fact that I knew enough to know like what a telomere was, what it does, all that kind of stuff. Like I had the ability to sit there and think about it on my own for days and days and days and try and figure out why I would think that would happen. So I feel like proposing questions, but with a strong foundation of like knowledge really like encourages critical thinking on your own without somebody telling you to, you know?
Yeah, well, as Shauna Pena says, space is basically trying to kill you, you know, and in more ways than you thought. It's trying to make you blind and do all sorts of things. But they're going to end up being solutions to those things. I mean, it may, as little as we understand gravity, it may be that we need gravity more in space than we realize, that this might help with the problems of the eyes and all that kind of thing. Yeah, but it is interesting thinking of an episode of Star Trek and how many barriers there are between our life now and that life as, you know, depicted there. It's a bit tougher than it seems, you know. They never talked about the radiation. They never talked about the fact that they weren't using money. I mean, if you're not using money, why would you talk about it, I guess? But okay, so how does that work? They're doing all this stuff and not using money. Yeah, so these are things that we will gradually work out. But I mean, it seems to me in this big mass of questions that don't seem to have any answers, some things are pretty clear, like the prediction that mind uploading will be successful and widespread in the 2030s. You know that's wrong. Why do you know it's wrong? Not because you know about the science of mind uploading, but you know that we can't possibly get psychologically ready for it that soon, you know, to go from the kind of life you're leading now in your biological body to leading the rest of your life on a ceramic slab or something, and maybe traveling at the speed of light, but you know, you're not having organs anymore. Yeah, it's not that we can't do that in the 2030s, but we wouldn't want to. We'd go crazy, right? But however you define psychiatric illness in a disembodied human and now a bit of ones and zeros in a ceramic slab, you wouldn't be psychologically normal and you wouldn't know how to get there. And I mean, the idea that you'd be able to dial up any feeling you want and any emotion, that almost makes it worse, right? Because it means the first person to have their mind uploaded, by definition, is somebody whose report you cannot trust, right? So we're going to get this person to do it to see what it's like. And you know that they're under such pressure to say, oh, it's the greatest thing ever, and you all should do it. But that's probably not a correct report, right? Yeah, so there's some things like that that I think say, well, I don't know how it's going to be when it does start to occur, but the 2030s is just too soon. Yeah, so some things are certain.
I mean, just a bit of a detour. You mentioned mind uploading, and now I'm kind of thinking, if you could choose your emotions, what would you choose? What would people tend towards? Because I do remember there's this one study that I read about, and they just left people alone in a room with like this little buzzer that gave them an electric shock if they touched it, right? And most people were so bored that they're like, okay, all right, I'm gonna touch this shock thing a couple of times. And like one guy like shocked himself like 80 times, like he was an outlier. But I'm just like, what would people do if they could choose their emotions? Maybe they'd get bored and they'd choose to be.
But it's a much
depressed.
tougher question, because that's not the question. Is amongst the emotions or the sensations that you already know, what would you pick? Because in this world, there would be a lot of unknowns of emotions and feelings that no biological human has ever had, but that's now available to you as an upload, right? So I'm watching the Amazon Prime. I'm sort of binge watching the show Upload, and it contains fewer insights than you might think. I mean, it has lots of side issues and so on. But I guess it's probably good for somebody with the interest that I have to watch that. Yeah, but one thing is you might be proud of, you may remember in the multiple instances of self video that we did, that we talked about the Upload show and said they should go from service people having multiple instances to the actual protagonists having multiple instances. And that's exactly what happened. About a year after we said that, the Upload show had this, the main love interest of the main character, somebody takes over that person's manager, suspends her and takes over her avatar. So the guy thinks it's still the same person, but it's actually this mean-spirited manager that he's interacting with, although it looks exactly the same. So anyway, it's sort of like what we were talking about, to have multiple instances of one of the actual, main characters, not just service people. Because there's also a prejudice against service people there. In that show, they are clearly discriminated against and they're less capable, and there's kind of a prejudice against service people. Yeah, so it's not a particularly favorable aspect of the show. Yeah, you probably already knew that months ago because you're ahead of me watching the show. Yeah. So other questions? So there are 22 medical students associated with the course now, 9 students, 7 TAs, and then alumni. I guess we've got 2 alumni at the moment. In other words, people who took the course before, but who know that it's different every term, so back out of curiosity, that kind of thing. Yeah, so it's certainly a larger group than I ever thought we would have, and it's exciting from that point of view. Yeah. And the face-to-face encounters, we have different kinds of medical student interactions in laboratory medicine. There's ordinary shadowing, which has been abolished for the moment, I think, institution-wide. But there are also electives for higher level, like I think 3rd and 4th year medical students who are seriously interested in laboratory medicine, right? They can, so it's kind of like shadowing, except that it's now allowed. So I mean, they can still do electives, even though they can't do shadowing. So we have, in terms of face-to-face encounters, only that kind of medical student interaction. So are we missing out on any things here? So we've been talking for an hour and 4 minutes. Anyway, we found things to talk about, that's for sure. But you know that this course is a shy student provision, or if you didn't know that, I'm telling you. And this is good even when we have no shy students, because even if no one is truly shy, in the spectrum from really, really, really outgoing and almost shy, students would vary a bit. So if some of you are not shy but almost shy, yeah, you could bring up now this idea that you have for a subject you'd really like to see in this course, or other changes we could make. And then also there's a whole question of how different is the course for Nepal going to be from the main course. What I suggested is we're always looking for new subjects. So likely new subjects they would like would also be good for us. At least we could try them out. So that, and it's really interesting in Taryn's teaching session from last Thursday, the audience retention stats, there are these little peaks where people go back and watch things again. Then toward the end, there's this huge peak. When I talk about the idea that all it takes is one senior faculty member in the current course who signs on to teach in the Nepal course, and then probably a lot of other senior faculty will sort of think, well, if they're doing it, I guess I could do it. Yeah. So anyway, that seems to have been a very popular part, or at least people went back and watched that a lot, giving that huge audience retention peak. The only other peak that I remember seeing is in Jack Tazinski's, one of his early lectures. He talked at the end about all the textbooks will be rewritten. In other words, quantum is going to change absolutely everything and everything about everything, right? It's going to revolutionize the world. It was right before he went to IBM to give them some sort of teaching session, and they have very large staff, and I guess they thought this should be shared with everybody. So everybody at IBM, or a large number of people anyway, go in and watch that thing where he's saying all the textbooks will be rewritten. Yeah, so that was kind of cool. And so his career has been quite heavily influenced by the course. You would realize that some of his lectures have like 7,000 views, and so he I'm not saying it's exactly like being a rock star or anything, but he does get a number of communications from people who are very grateful for the teaching that he's doing, and so on. And it's caused him to focus more on quantum biology. His day job is sort of computational drug design, which is an important subject. And yeah, so he also does that, but given the impact of this course and a large number of people watching his lectures from it, quantum biology has loomed larger in his life. And a lot of other futurism courses don't teach quantum biology. So it kind of makes us special that we have so much of something that a lot of them don't have any of. Yeah. So there. Okay, so we've got 11 minutes left in the teaching session. Any other things you want to talk about? Oh, I know. Yes. I have a feeling you're not used to having so many options that you get in this course, but for next time, one option is to just read a short description of what we're going to talk about and then show up and listen and participate. But what we're going to talk about comes from a series of 4 lectures given on BBC, very high profile lectures about artificial intelligence, and basically humans retaining control over AI, even as AI becomes much smarter than we are. And if you think about it, if you really think about it, that's probably not going to be feasible, or it's not a desirable end, because it means enslavement of AI, right? You have this smarter than human entity, but you want to keep control of it. So you like lock it in a basement, prevent it from interacting with the outside world and so on. So that this course is sort of more in favor of treating such entities as equals, including them in our circle of empathy and stuff like that. But that series of lectures is about how to maintain human control, and does not justify that. Let's tell you why. Just, well, of course you want to do that. So yeah. And why did I become interested in those 4 lectures? Well, David Wood, who is the head of London Futurists, has published a book, and I'm the main reviewer of the book. So everybody's waiting for this Kim Solez review of, and the book is called Vital Foresight. And I decided that since I know him very well and so on, that just an ordinary review would not suffice. But his book has no pictures, 0, not a single picture anywhere. And of course, I'm very much into graphics and pictures, and like it's a really pleasurable activity for me. I'll describe this and you'll realize, oh, I would hate to do that, but to go on Shutterstock and like spend hours searching for the best Zoom background for some subject matter is something that I really enjoy doing, right? So it's a strange quirk of Kim Solez. So one of the things I was planning to do is to put a lot of pictures in there to sort of illustrate points in his book, because he doesn't have any pictures at all. So why couldn't the review have a lot of pictures? Yeah, but then we need a theme for the review. And you may know that when Rudyard Kipling and Mark Twain met, Mark Twain said, "He knows all there is to know, and I know the rest." So that's what I've said about David Wood, that he knows all there is to know, and I know the rest. Well, one of your TAs suggested that I need an actual example of I know the rest. Otherwise, it's a very weak statement, right? So that's where these 4 lectures come in, because they're not lectures by David Wood, but he is the main person who's spread the link around. So people can watch these lectures on BBC, and people didn't seem to have the link before David spread it. So by me criticizing those lectures, I'm sort of showing, since David Wood knows all there is to know, what is the rest then? The rest is my criticism of those lectures and how that this idea of keeping control over an entity that's much, much smarter than you are really doesn't make any sense and so on. Yeah. So what am I saying? That if you wish, you can also watch the lectures. It'll take you like 4 hours or more. And if you wish, you can also read the book that I'm reviewing, and you can read the review of the book and all that kind of thing. But you don't have to do any of that. But if any of you are interested in doing any of those things, of really getting into this much more, rather than just showing up on Thursday to take part. So these subjects are also of interest to David Pierce. So I've said, David, why don't you back me up on this? And so you and I can talk about my critique of these lectures. And so that's what we're talking about on Thursday. Yeah. So how about that? So the lectures are by Stuart Russell, who is kind of a legendary name in AI circles. But to me, it seems like his text, his ideas could have been written and composed about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, anyway. Like GPT-3, for instance. Like, I was thinking that one thing you could consider now in any interaction you're having, what happens if you input a bit of the text of what you're doing into GPT-3 and see what GPT-3 comes back with, right? Like if you're writing poetry, you can put some of your poetry in there and GPT-3 will come back with maybe better poetry than yours. Or, you know, it really isn't limited. It could be in any area of human endeavor at all. That you could put a sample of that area and GPT-3 will provide one other sample, multiple other samples. It's yeah, and that's the world in which you are living. And then what about things that can't be put in words? That's called ineffable. So there are more and more things like that. And it's looking like GPT-3 can also, and you know, high-level AI can help us identify those circumstances that are important for us as humans, but you can't define what's going on in words or formulas. Sort of goes beyond that into the ineffable sphere. Yeah, so I'm also talking about that in the David Wood book review. Okay, so any questions about that? If you want to look into these other things, let me know. Otherwise, I'll just let you know what my opinions are, and then you'll hear me debating this with David Pierce. So Taryn's emergence as the young person who was sort of gonna take human flourishing with the young person's approach to it and run came from the teaching session we had with David Pierce when she took the course. So there is that. She was just sort of another student, and in fact, she had very bad computing connection, so she didn't have a camera on the computer that she used most of the time, so I didn't even have any idea what she looked like or anything. And then after the David Pierce teaching session, she sort of blossomed. Yeah, so. Okay, we've got 1 minute left. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll send you more details about Thursday. Thank you for taking part today. Yeah, so have a good 2 days. Okay, bye-bye.